Picture this. September 1922. A German steamship called the Oberbürgermeister Haken is loaded with Russia's most dangerous weapons. Not bombs, not guns. Philosophers. 70 intellectuals who committed the ultimate crime against the Soviet state. They wouldn't stop thinking. Among them, a 48-year-old man with a beard like an Old Testament prophet and eyes that had seen the future and decided it was bullshit. Nikolai Berdyaev, aristocrat, ex-Marxist, professional pain in the ass to every authority that ever tried to tell him what truth looked like. Lenin personally approved the passenger list. Think about that. The man who orchestrated a revolution, who ordered the execution of the Tsar's children, who was building a workers' paradise on mountains of corpses. He was concerned about philosophers. Not concerned enough to kill them, but concerned enough to make them someone else's problem. Berdyaev had figured out a secret, the thing that neither the Bolsheviks nor the capitalists nor the church authorities wanted you to know. You are not actually trapped. The cage is unlocked. You just keep walking back inside because being free is fucking terrifying. Berdyaev didn't just theorize about freedom, he lived it. He lived it like the only thing that matters. He started as a revolutionary plotting to overthrow Tsars. Then he had a mystical experience and realized Marxism was just another cage with prettier wallpaper. So he became a Christian. The kind of Christian that tells God himself, I won't be obedient, I'll be creative. His big idea, the one that got him exiled, was this. Freedom doesn't come from God. Freedom comes before God. It's not a gift, it's not earned, it's the primordial chaos that existed before anything existed, and even God has to respect it because without freedom, love is just slavery with better branding. The 20th century specialized in turning humans into objects. Communism did it, fascism did it, capitalism does it with a smile and a commercial break. Berdyaev saw it coming. He watched the rehearsal in Russia and spent 26 years in exile screaming the same warning. You're volunteering for your own objectification. You're choosing the machine. You are afraid of the one thing that makes you human. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Berdyaev watched his homeland disappear. He would never see Russia again. He chose exile over silence, freedom over belonging. Most people make the opposite choice every single day and call it wisdom. This is his story. And if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, my friend, then you are not paying attention.
835.
Nikolai Alexandrovich Berdyaev was born in Kiev in 1874 with a silver spoon so far down his throat he could have choked on it. Military aristocracy. The kind of family where your grandfather was a general and your father was a general, and you were supposed to shut the fuck up and become a general yourself. Estates, servants, the whole rotting apparatus of imperial privilege. The problem with privilege is that it's not a gift, it's a trap. You're born into a system that works perfectly for you, which means you never have to think about whether the system itself is completely fucked. Most people in Berdyaev's position would have coasted, collected their rents, married well, and died comfortable. But Berdyaev saw this inheritance as a prison. By the time he was a teenager, he was reading the forbidden stuff. Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, a lot of them we've covered on the podcast before. Those philosophers who ask the dangerous questions like, what if everything you've been told is a lie designed to keep you obedient? He enrolled at Kiev University in 1894 to study natural sciences, then switched to law, and then said, well, bollocks to both of these, and just read philosophy in the library like a man planning an escape route. 1898. Berdyaev joins a Marxist group, not because he was into economics. He actually found Marx's materialism quite depressing, but because Marxism was the only game in town if you wanted to burn down the world and start over. Revolution was in the air. You could taste it like metal before a storm. The secret police noticed, of course they noticed, in Imperial Russia, thinking was a crime if you did it too loud. They arrested him. 24 years old, charged with revolutionary activity. The sentence? Exiled to Vologda in northern Russia for 3 years, and I apologize for my pronunciation of that. Here is where it gets interesting. The Tsarist government wasn't trying to destroy intellectuals, they were trying to bore them to death. Exile meant a small town in the middle of nowhere. No bars, no cafes, no revolution, just snow and silence and far too much time to think. Most revolutionaries would have spent 3 years in exile getting angrier and more committed when they're ready to come back and just burn the whole thing down. But Berdyaev did something else. He started reading theology and Dostoevsky and the mystics. And in that silence, something broke open inside him. Or maybe something broke closed. Maybe the revolutionary fervor was the breaking and this was the healing, who knows. The man himself probably didn't know. In Vologda, Berdyaev realized that Marxism, this ideology he had risked everything for, was just another framework of control. Different bars, same cage. Marxism said, history is material, economics is everything. Consciousness is just meat thinking meat thoughts. Humans are products of their class position, their economic relations, their material conditions. Change the material conditions, change the human, build the right system, create the right man. Berdyaev sat in the snow and thought, that's exactly what the aristocracy says. That's exactly what the church says. That is exactly what everyone who wants to control you says. You are not free, you're determined by God, by history, by economics, by biology. So stop trying to be free and accept your place in our beautiful system. The problem with materialism isn't that it's wrong about matter. The problem is it makes freedom impossible. If you are just atoms bouncing around according to the laws of physics and economics, then there is no you. There's no choice, no meaning, just a machine running its program. And Berdyaev, aristocrat and revolutionary, looked at that and said, I refuse. There has to be something else. There has to be spirit. There has to be freedom. Otherwise, what is the point of any of this? He didn't become a Christian because Christianity was safe or comfortable. He became a Christian because Christianity, properly understood, was the only philosophy that said humans weren't just meat robots waiting for the right economic conditions. Christianity said that you're free, dangerously, terrifyingly, absolutely free. But he wasn't going back to the Christianity of the Orthodox Church with its icons and its rituals and obedience. Fuck obedience. He was going towards something wilder, something the church authorities would hate as much as the Marxists. Berdyaev returned from exile in 1901 and walked straight into Russia's Silver Age, that strange, feverish period between 1890 and 1917, when Russian culture lost its mind in the best possible way. Symbolist poets, mystical philosophers, artists trying to paint the invisible. Everyone was high on apocalypse and possibility. He fell in with the God-seekers, Dmitry Merezhkovsky, Sergei Bulgakov, intellectuals who'd been Marxists and revolutionaries and were now trying to forge a new Christianity. Not the Christianity of peasants and priests, a Christianity for the modern world, a Christianity of freedom and creativity and the divine spark in every human soul. They met in Petersburg. They published journals with names like New Path and Questions of Life. They argued until dawn about whether God was personal or impersonal, whether matter was evil or sanctified, whether the revolution would be spiritual or political or both. The Orthodox Church watched them like a cop watching a fight outside a bar, trying to decide if this was religious revival or heresy. The revolutionaries watched them like ex-lovers, trying to decide if this was betrayal or evolution. Berdyaev didn't care. He was working out his own philosophy, synthesizing Kant and Dostoevsky and Bohm and his own fevered visions into something new. The question that drove everything Berdyaev would write for the next 40 years was this: how do you reconcile freedom with God? Most people think these are opposites. Either God is sovereign and you're not free, or you're free and God is irrelevant. Either God determines everything, every thought, every choice, every action, or God is just a spectator watching the chaos unfold. But Berdyaev said, wrong question, bad binary, lazy thinking, you naughty. What if freedom isn't something God gives you? What if freedom is what makes God possible? What if there's this primal chaos, this uncreated freedom that exists before anything exists, before God, before matter, before time, and that's where everything comes from? Not order imposing itself on chaos, but freedom creating out of itself. If God created freedom, he could take it away. He could revoke the gift when you use it wrong, like a parent taking away a toy or banning you from using the Xbox. But if freedom is eternal and uncreated, if it's the ground of being itself, then even God has to respect it. God can't violate your freedom without violating the fundamental structure of reality. This isn't the God who says, obey me. This is the God who says, create with me. The Orthodox Church heard this and smelled heresy. The Marxists heard this and smelled idealism. Berdyaev heard this and thought, finally, a philosophy where humans aren't slaves to anything, not to God, not to history, not to their own nature. A philosophy of freedom so radical it would get him exiled again. But first, the revolution had to come, the real one, the one that would force him to choose between the country he loved and the truth he couldn't stop speaking. Let's move on to the thing that made Berdyaev intellectually radioactive. The idea is so dangerous that theologians still get nervous when his name comes up. The philosophical grenade he rolled into every comfortable conversation about God and free will. Freedom doesn't come from God, freedom comes before God. Think about that statement. Let it sink in. Because this isn't some semantic game or clever wordplay. This is Berdyaev looking at 2,000 years of Christian theology and saying, you've got it backwards, all of you, the whole thing upside down. Traditional Christianity says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God creates everything. God creates humans. God gives humans free will as a gift, a test, a divine experiment to see if we'll choose obedience or rebellion. And when we choose rebellion, when Eve bites the apple, when Cain kills Abel, that's us abusing the gift. That is us breaking the toy that God gave us. Berdyaev said, no, stop. That's not freedom. That's permission. And permission can be revoked. If God created your freedom, then your freedom is contingent, dependent, conditional, which means it is not really freedom at all. It is just a longer leash. Berdyaev went digging in the weird corners of Christian mysticism and found Jacob Boehme, a 16th century German shoemaker who had visions of the cosmic machinery and tried to explain them using whatever words a shoemaker had available. Boehme talked about the Ungrund, the groundless, the abyss, the primal nothing something that exists before God exists. Not nothing like empty space, nothing like potential, like the void is pregnant with possibility, like chaos isn't the opposite of order. Chaos is what makes order possible. Berdyaev took this idea and ran with it, like a man who just found the exit door in a burning building. He said, before God, before creation, before anything, there's this uncreated freedom, this wild, irrational, primordial force, the Ungrund. And out of this freedom, everything emerges, including God. Now, this might blow your mind a bit, but Berdyaev is saying that God isn't the foundation. Freedom is the foundation. God is what freedom creates when freedom decides to become conscious of itself. This is why the churches hated him, and this is why he couldn't get Orthodox theologians to shut up about how heretical he was. Because he was taking the throne away from God and giving it to freedom. He was saying the ultimate reality isn't a being, it's a possibility. An infinite, uncreated, chaotic possibility. And we're not God's puppets. We're not God's children. We are co-eternal participants in the cosmic drama of freedom becoming conscious. Okay, but so what? Why does this philosophical masturbation matter to anyone who's not writing a dissertation nobody will read? Because it changes everything about how you understand yourself. If God created you and gave you freedom as a gift, then you are fundamentally derivative. Secondary, you exist at God's pleasure. Your freedom is on loan, and any day now, God might decide you've abused the privilege and take it back, which means your whole life is spent trying not to piss off the landlord. That is not freedom. That is Stockholm Syndrome with glorious hymns. But if freedom is uncreated, if it's eternal and primordial, and even God has to respect it, then you are not derivative, you are not secondary, you're fundamental. You're not a puppet waiting to see if the strings get cut. I wish I was a real boy, Geppetto. You're a fucking participant in the foundational nature of reality itself. Your choices actually matter, not because God is testing you, but because choice is the structure of existence. Freedom isn't what you do, freedom is what you are. Think about how this changes the whole guilt game. Traditional Christianity says, you have sinned, you've used your free will wrong, you're broken, you need fixing. Come crawl back to God and beg forgiveness, and maybe He'll let you into heaven after you die. Berdyaev says, you are not broken, you're free. And yes, freedom means you can choose badly. You can choose slavery. You can choose to objectify yourself, to make yourself into a thing, to treat yourself like a machine that needs optimization. But that is not sin against God. That is sin against your own nature. You're not failing God's test. You're failing your own possibilities. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The problem of evil. If God is all-powerful and all good, why does He allow suffering? That's the age-old question, isn't it? Why do children get cancer? Why do tsunamis kill hundreds of thousands of people? Why is existence one long meat grinder of pain, loss, suffering, and entropy? Traditional answers are all variations of, it's a mystery. God works in mysterious ways. Suffering builds character. It's punishment for sin. It's a test. Trust the plan. Berdyaev said, stop making excuses for God. The answer is obvious. God allows suffering because the alternative, violating freedom, would be worse, would be the ultimate evil. If God intervened every time freedom produced something ugly or painful or horrific, then freedom would be a joke, a simulation, a video game where you can press buttons, but the outcome is predetermined. God would just be a cosmic helicopter parent, bubble wrapping reality so nothing sharp could ever cause harm. Evil exists because freedom is real, and freedom is real because it's not something God controls. God doesn't permit evil. God respects the uncreated freedom that makes both good and evil possible. This isn't God being weak or indifferent. This is God loving freedom more than He loves control. Because a world with freedom, real choice, real creativity, real risk, is more valuable than a world where everything is safe and predetermined and dead. So if God isn't testing your obedience, what the fuck are you supposed to do with your life? Create. That's it. That's Berdyaev's answer. You are here to create, to add something new to existence, to participate in the ongoing act of reality creating itself. Not create like paint a painting or write a novel, although of course that counts. Create like be genuinely yourself. Make choices that never would have been made if you didn't exist. Love in ways that are unique to you. Think thoughts that are actually yours, not just downloaded from your parents or your culture or your Twitter feed. Most people don't create. They repeat. They imitate. They follow the script. They become good employees, good citizens, good consumers. They objectify themselves, turn themselves into functions, roles, predictable units to fit neatly into the system. Berdyaev said that that is the real sin, not disobedience, not breaking the rules. The real sin is refusing to create, choosing safety over possibility, the machine over the mess. What Berdyaev didn't say directly, but I will, is this. You are afraid of freedom. We all are. Because freedom means responsibility. Freedom means you can't blame God or society or your childhood for the life that you're living. Freedom means every day is a choice between creating something new or repeating something dead. And creating is hard. Creating is risky. It means you might fail, you might look stupid. You might discover you're not as special as you thought you were. So instead, we choose obedience. We choose the system. We choose the comfortable lie that we're not really free, that we're just products of our circumstances, that we're doing the best we can given the hand we were dealt. Berdyaev would take that comfortable lie and say, no, you're free, terrifying, absolutely cosmically free. And that freedom existed before God and will exist after God and is the only thing that makes you actually human. So now I ask you this. What are you going to do about that? It's 1917, February. The Tsar abdicates. 300 years of Romanov rule ends because soldiers refuse to shoot striking workers, and everyone suddenly realizes the emperor has no clothes and never did. Berdyaev watches from his apartment in Moscow. He's 43 years old now, not the young revolutionary who got exiled to Vologda, not the firebrand who wanted to burn down the old world. He spent 2 decades building a philosophy of freedom, and now freedom is coming whether anyone is ready or not. Except it's not freedom, it's chaos pretending to be freedom. It's the ungrund without the consciousness, the void without the creativity. Spring and summer, Russia tears itself apart. The provincial government tries to hold things together with parliamentary procedure and good intentions. Lenin comes back from exile in a sealed train car provided by the Germans, because nothing says popular revolution like being delivered by your enemy's military intelligence. October. The Bolsheviks seize power, not through elections, through armed insurrection, through the barrel of a gun pointed at the Winter Palace. Lenin promises peace, land, bread. What he delivers is the Cheka, war communism, and the beginning of terror. He watches and thinks, I know exactly where this goes. I've read this book. I helped write the early chapters. Berdyaev understood that Bolshevism wasn't a deviation from Marxism. It was Marxism stripped of its humanist pretensions. It was the logical conclusion of materialist philosophy applied with revolutionary zeal. Marx said consciousness is determined by material conditions. Lenin said, good, then we'll determine the material conditions and thereby determine consciousness. We'll engineer the perfect human by engineering the perfect society. We'll create new Soviet man, selfless, obedient, productive, free from religion and superstition and individual desire. Berdyaev said, that's not creating a new human, that's murdering the old one. Because the thing about materialism is that if humans are just meat machines programmed by economics, then there's nothing sacred about them. No soul, no inherent dignity, no freedom that can't be overridden by the correct social engineering. You're not a person, you're a problem to be solved, a unit to be optimized, raw material for the collective. The Bolsheviks looked at freedom and saw inefficiency. They looked at individuality and saw bourgeois decadence. They looked at anyone who thought differently and saw counter-revolutionaries, wreckers, enemies of the people who needed to be liquidated like you'd liquidate a corporation. Berdyaev had spent 20 years arguing that freedom precedes God. Now he was watching a regime that believed freedom was a bourgeois illusion that preceded the firing squad. Most intellectuals shut up. They went along. They told themselves, yes, there are excesses, but the cause is just. Yes, people are dying, but you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Yes, the Cheka is brutal, but we are building a better world. Just give it time. Just be patient. Just don't ask too many fucking questions. Berdyaev couldn't shut up. Constitutionally incapable of shutting up, he had already been exiled once for speaking uncomfortable truths to power, and he would do it again, goddammit. He wrote articles, he gave lectures, he said in public what everyone else was whispering in private. This isn't liberation, this is a new slavery with better propaganda. You've replaced God with history, you have replaced the church with the party, and the Tsar with the committee. But it's the same fundamental crime. Teaching persons as objects, means as ends, individuals as expendable resources for the collective good. The Cheka noticed. In Soviet Russia, silence was compliance and compliance was mandatory. Thinking was fine as long as you thought the correct thoughts. Speaking was fine as long as you said the correct words. Berdyaev was not saying the correct words. He was saying words like freedom and person and spirit, words that suggested maybe humans were more than economic units in the great dialectical machine. His friends started disappearing. Arrested, interrogated, sent to camps or cellars. Some came back, most didn't. The ones who came back weren't the same. They had learned the lesson. Shut up or die. Berdyaev kept talking. 1919. In the middle of civil war, famine and state terror, Berdyaev does something completely insane. He establishes the Free Academy of Spiritual Culture in Moscow. Free. That word alone was basically treason. The Bolsheviks didn't do free. They did controlled. They did approved. They did serving the interests of the proletariat as determined by the party. Berdyaev gathered whoever would come, philosophers, theologians, artists, and held lectures on religion, ethics, and metaphysics. Topics the new regime considered counter-revolutionary at best, actively harmful at worst. Discussing whether humans have souls when the party line is that souls are superstitious nonsense. That is not education, that's sabotage. The academy lasted a few years, a miracle it lasted that long. Berdyaev lecturing about freedom and personhood and the divine spark, while outside, commissars were shooting people for having the wrong class background or insufficient enthusiasm for collectivization. It was beautiful and doomed, a candle in a hurricane. A man screaming into the void that persons matter, that spirits matter, that you can't build paradise by treating humans like construction materials. The GPU, the new secret police, same as the old secret police with a different acronym, watched and waited, built a file, documented every word, every lecture, every dangerous idea that suggested maybe the party didn't have a monopoly on truth. They came for him on a September night. GPU officers, polite but firm. Citizen Berdyaev, you are under arrest. Counter-revolutionary activity, ideological sabotage, failure to embrace the bright socialist future. They took him to Lubyanka, the building that would become synonymous with terror, though at this point it was still warming up. Interrogation. Questions. Why do you persist in promoting religious mysticism? Why do you refuse to acknowledge the historical necessity of the dictatorship of the proletariat? Why won't you shut the fuck up and get with the program? Berdyaev gave them the same answer he'd been given for 20 years. Because I'm free. Because persons are sacred. Because you can't build a better world by crushing everything that makes humans human. They gave him the choice. Not the choice most people got, which was obey or die. A different choice. A special choice reserved for intellectuals the regime found too prominent to kill, but too dangerous to keep. Leave. Permanently. Get on a ship and never come back. Go be someone else's problem. Take your freedom and your philosophy and your dangerous ideas and get the fuck out of our workers' paradise. Or refuse. And find out what happens to people who do so. September 29th, 1922. The Oberbürgermeister Haken sits in Petrograd Harbour. 70 intellectuals, their families, their books, everything they could carry. The philosopher's ship. Lenin's solution to the intellectual problem. Can't shoot them, too much international attention. Can't ignore them, too much domestic influence. So export them. Make them stateless. Turn them into goats. Goats? Turn them into goats. Turn them into ghosts. Berdyaev stood on the deck as the ship pulled away. Watched the shoreline recede. St. Petersburg, Petrograd, whatever they were calling it now. The city where he'd argued and lectured and lived and loved. The country where he was born. The land he'd wanted to revolutionize, then save, then at least bear witness to. Gone. All of it. Forever. He was 48 years old. He would live another 26. He would never see Russia again. The revolution had promised freedom and delivered the Gulag, had promised brotherhood and delivered the Cheka, had promised a new human and delivered the broken one, the terrorized one, the one who learned to repeat the correct slogans and report his neighbors and never, ever think a dangerous thought. Berdyaev chose exile over that, chose homelessness over silence, chose the unknown over the unbearable. Most people make the opposite choice and call it survival. The ship docks in Germany. Welcome to Weimar, Berlin. Decadent, desperate, inflating so fast you need a wheelbarrow of cash to buy bread. The mark is collapsing. The social order is collapsing. Everyone's either fucking or fighting or both, trying to squeeze some pleasure out of the wreckage before the next catastrophe hits. Berdyaev sets up shop with the other Russian exiles. There are thousands of them now. Aristocrats, intellectuals, officers, anyone who chose exile over execution. They open cafes and publishing houses and argue about what went wrong, whether they'll ever go home, whether home even exists anymore. He starts writing, not journaling or taking notes, writing like a man possessed, like he's got 26 years to warn the world about what he's seen and he's not sure that's enough time. 1924, the new Middle Ages, his diagnosis. Western civilization is dying. Not might die, is dying. Right now. The Renaissance project, humanism, rationalism, faith in progress, it's over. Done. We're entering a new dark age. Could be a spiritual rebirth or complete collapse. Depends on whether we remember that persons are sacred or keep treating them like machines. The West reads it and thinks, okay, dramatic Russian exile being dramatic, shell-shocked from the revolution. Give him time, he'll calm down. He doesn't calm down. 1933. Hitler takes power. Suddenly, Berlin isn't safe for anyone who thinks wrong or looks wrong or exists wrong. In 1934, Berdyaev moves to Paris, Clamart, specifically a suburb south of the city. Quieter, cheaper, far enough from the centre to work without distraction, close enough to matter. He keeps writing. He's writing the instruction manual for how to stay human when everything around you is designed to make you into an object. The Destiny of Man, 1931. Humans aren't here to obey, they're here to create. Ethics isn't about following rules, it's about participating in the ongoing creation of reality. Every moment is a choice between freedom and slavery, between being a person and being a thing. Slavery and Freedom, 1939. Written as Europe is gearing up for another war, another industrial slaughter, Berdyaev's thesis, we are addicted to slavery, we choose it, we volunteer for it, because freedom is terrifying and slavery is comfortable. The Russian Idea, 1946. His attempt to explain Russia to the West and the West to Russia, to diagnose why Russia keeps producing those messianic totalitarian movements, why the same impulse that produced orthodox mysticism produced Bolshevism. Same apocalyptic fervor, same willingness to sacrifice persons for the grand vision, different ideology, same crime. Book after book, article after article, all saying the same thing in different ways. You're doing it again. You're making the same mistake. You're treating humans like means instead of ends. You're building systems that devour souls. And you think you're different from the Bolsheviks because your propaganda is prettier and your cattle cars are more comfortable. No one wanted to listen to Berdyaev because he attacked everyone, promiscuously, enthusiastically, equal opportunity offense. The anti-communists loved him when he talked about Soviet tyranny. Then he'd turn around and say, but Western capitalism is just slower slavery. You're not free. You're owned by your employer, your mortgage, your consumer debt. You've traded the commissar for the corporation. Same objectification, better branding. The socialists loved him when he criticized capitalism. Then he'd pivot and say, but your solution, centralized planning, collective ownership, the dictatorship of the proletariat, that is just Soviet tyranny with a human face. You can't liberate people by putting them in a different cage. The Christians loved him when he defended spiritual values. Then he'd tell them, but your church is a machine for crushing the spirit. Your obsession with obedience and hierarchy and institutional authority, that is exactly what makes religion the opium of the masses. You have turned the gospel into a management structure. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, and fuck you. Everyone wanted him to pick a side, communist or capitalist, believer or atheist, east or west. He said no. All sides are wrong because all sides start with the system and try to fit people into it. The question isn't which system is best. The question is, why do you keep choosing systems over people? Under communism, you're an economic unit serving the collective. Under capitalism, you're an economic unit serving the market. Under fascism, you're an economic unit serving the nation. Different masters, same fucking slavery. The only real question is, will you be a person or a thing? Will you create or repeat? Will you live in freedom or die in comfort? The Wehrmacht rolls into France. The Third Reich, another gang of true believers convinced they figured out how to engineer the perfect society. Different ideology than the Bolsheviks, but same contempt for individual human life and same willingness to stack bodies like firewood for the greater good. Berdyaev is 66 years old, stateless, Russian exile in occupied France. Should be terrified, should be planning escape, keeping his head down and his mouth shut. But of course, this is Berdyaev, he keeps on writing. Under Nazi occupation, with German soldiers patrolling the streets and Gestapo checking papers and collaborators reporting on their neighbours, Berdyaev sits in his study in Clamart and writes about freedom and personhood and the absolute value of the human soul. It's not courage, or maybe it is, but that is not how he'd frame it. He'd say, what else would I do? Shut up, collaborate, pretend that people don't matter just because the current regime says they don't. I've already been exiled once for telling the truth. I am too old to learn new tricks. The Nazis leave him alone. Barely. Too old, too irrelevant, too foreign, not worth the paperwork. Or maybe someone somewhere decides that shooting a Russian religious philosopher will create more problems than it solves. He survives. France is liberated. The war ends. Berdyaev is 71 years old and he's outlived the Tsar, the Bolsheviks' initial terror, Stalin's purges, and Hitler's occupation. He keeps writing. And ultimately, he dies alone. The Orthodox Church never forgave him, too heretical, too willing to question authority, too insistent that the institutional church was often an obstacle to genuine spirituality. They'd read his books and find the same heresies: freedom before God, creativity as religious duty, persons above systems. Unacceptable! The Western intellectuals never embraced him. Too religious, too mystical, too Russian, too willing to talk about the soul in an age when everyone serious was talking about economics and politics and material conditions. They'd publish him, translate him, even respect him. But embrace him, make him part of the canon? Nah, too weird, too intense, a little bit too much. The exiles, his fellow Russians scattered across Europe, they understood him better. They'd lived through it. They knew what he was talking about when he described the mechanization of the soul, the transformation of persons into objects. But they were ghosts too, stateless, homeless, waiting to die far from the country they loved. Berdyaev spent 26 years in exile writing books that almost everyone misunderstood. The anti-communists thought he was their guy until he criticized capitalism. The Christians thought he was their guy until he criticized the church. The existentialists thought he was their guy until he insisted God was non-negotiable. He wasn't anyone's guy. He was his own guy, which is exactly what he'd been preaching the whole time. Be a person, not a member, not a unit, not a soldier in someone else's army, a person. Tsars, commissars, capitalists, Nazis. Berdyaev's message never changed. Across 5 decades, through 2 world wars, through revolution and exile and occupation. Persons are sacred. Freedom is eternal. Systems are dangerous. Creation is necessary. Choose life over safety. Choose truth over comfort. Choose being a person over being a thing. The world refused to listen. He kept saying it anyway. Berdyaev spent his entire life watching people volunteer for their own enslavement. Not forced, not coerced, volunteering. He called it objectification, the process by which a person becomes a thing. A subject becomes an object. A living, creative, unrepeatable human consciousness reduces itself to a function, a predictable unit in someone else's machine. And the part that made him crazy was that nobody was holding a gun to their heads. They were doing it themselves, eagerly, gratefully, with a smile and a LinkedIn profile. Objectification isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do to yourself because being a thing is easier than being a person. Things don't have to make choices. Things don't have to create. Things don't have to live with the terrifying freedom of knowing that every moment could be different if only you were brave enough to make it different. Things just function, execute their programming, follow their algorithm, optimize their performance, and at the end of the day, Things get to blame the system when everything falls apart. Persons don't get that luxury. Berdyaev watched objectification wear different masks across his lifetime. Different ideologies, different promises, same old shit. Under communism, you objectify yourself by becoming Soviet man. You erase your individuality for the collective. You purge your dangerous thoughts, your bourgeois desires, and your counter-revolutionary feelings. You become a worker, a unit, a cog. You fulfill your quota. You report your neighbors. You repeat the slogans. And you tell yourself that this is liberation because the party said so. Under fascism, you objectify yourself by becoming part of the organic whole, the nation, the Volk, the master race. You surrender your personhood to the tribal identity. You march in formation. You salute the flag. You kill the designated enemies. And you tell yourself this is meaning because at least you belong to something bigger than yourself. Under capitalism, and this is where Berdyaev really pissed people off, you objectify yourself by becoming an economic unit, a consumer, a producer, a human resource. You optimize yourself for the market. You build your brand. You monetize your passion. You turn your relationships into networking opportunities and your hobbies into side hustles. And you tell yourself this is freedom because you chose whose corporation to rent yourself to. Different systems, different lies, same underlying transaction. You agree to stop being a person in exchange for not having to deal with the responsibility of freedom. The communists promise you security through collective ownership. The fascists promise you meaning through tribal belonging. The capitalists promise you success through self-optimization. They all deliver the same thing, a script, a function, a way to get through life without ever having to make a genuinely free choice. Now let's talk about right now, about you and the specific flavor of objectification that you are currently marinating in while you listen to this. Berdyaev died in 1948. He never saw the internet, never saw social media, lucky bastard, never saw smartphones or algorithms or the attention economy. He never saw how we'd build machines that literally treat human consciousness as raw material to be harvested and monetized. But he'd recognize it instantly. He'd see exactly what's happening. You're doing it to yourself, again, voluntarily, enthusiastically. You're reducing yourself to data, to metrics, to engagement rates and follower counts and productivity scores. You're outsourcing your memory to the cloud, your decisions to the algorithm, your fucking cognitive load to an AI. You're not using the technology's using you. You are the product, the raw material, the thing being optimized for someone else's profit margin. Every time you check your phone, you are practicing objectification. You're training yourself to be a stimulus response machine, you Pavlovian bastard. Notification comes in, dopamine goes out. Post goes up, validation comes back. Question appears, answer gets Googled. You are not thinking, you are processing. You're not creating, you're consuming. You are not living. You are performing life for an audience that's also performing for you. And nobody's actually present because everyone's too busy documenting the moment to experience it. Berdyaev would look at your screen time report and your productivity apps and your self-quantification obsession and say, you're doing to yourself what the Bolsheviks did to dissidents. You're eliminating the person, creating the optimal unit. Except this time there's no commissar, just you, cheerfully and voluntarily, because the cage looks like freedom when it's decorated with Netflix and Amazon Prime. So what's the way out? How do you stop being a thing and start being a person? Berdyaev had one answer, the same answer for 74 years. Through revolution and exile and war and occupation, one answer. Create. Not create like make content, that's still objectification. That's still turning your creativity into a product for consumption. Create like make choices that are genuinely yours. Think thoughts that didn't come pre-packaged from your tribe or your algorithm or your therapist. Love people in ways that are specific to you and them, not generic romantic script you downloaded from movies. Create like be present, be unrepeatable, be the one person in all of existence who is exactly you, with your specific combinations of gifts and wounds and possibilities and failures. Most people never do this. Most people live their entire lives on autopilot, following the script, playing the role, being good employees, good citizens, good consumers, good dog, optimizing themselves for systems that don't give a fuck about them except as extractable resources. And then they die, and the world continues exactly as it is, because they never added anything new. They just repeated what was already there. That is the unforgivable sin. Not disobedience, not rule breaking, not moral failure. The unforgivable sin is refusing to be yourself, refusing to create, spending your entire existence as a thing when you could have been a person. Late in his life, Berdyaev wrote about the end of the world, not like fire and brimstone or judgment and damnation, the end of the world as the end of objectification. The kingdom of God, properly understood, isn't harps and clouds and eternal worship services. That's heaven as bureaucracy. The kingdom is the moment when all systems collapse, when all necessities end, when all objectification becomes impossible, when there's nothing left but persons relating to persons in absolute freedom and absolute creativity. No more roles, no more functions, no more having to be anything other than exactly what you are. Time ends. History ends. The machine stops. And what's left is just being. Conscious, free, creative, unrepeatable, sacred. Berdyaev believed this was coming, not because God will impose it, but because freedom would eventually burn through every cage, every system, every attempt to reduce persons to things. The kingdom isn't a place. It's not a future state. It's the eternal dimension of freedom that exists right now underneath all the machinery waiting for you to notice it. You are not trapped. You're comfortable. You are not oppressed by the system. You're addicted to it. Every day you wake up and choose the cage. You choose the script. You choose the role. You choose to be a thing instead of a person because being a person is fucking terrifying. Being a person means you're responsible, means you can't blame your parents or your trauma or your economic circumstances for the life you're living. It means every moment is a choice and every choice matters and there's no algorithm to tell you what's optimal. Being a person means you might fail, you might look stupid, you might discover that you're not really that special or talented or important. You might have to live with the knowledge that you made free choices and they were the wrong ones and there's nobody to blame but yourself. So instead, you choose slavery. You choose the comfort of being determined, of being a product of your conditions, of being a victim of circumstances, of being anything except the terrifying, absolute, cosmically free being you actually are. Berdyaev is dead 76 years and he's still calling you out, still asking the same question he asked the Bolsheviks and the capitalists and the fascists and everyone who thought they could escape freedom by joining the right system. When are you going to stop being a thing and start being a person? When are you going to create instead of consume? When are you going to live instead of optimize? March 23rd, 1948. Clamart, France. Berdyaev is 73 years old, sitting at his desk, writing, always writing, mid-sentence in another manuscript about freedom and personhood and the sacred dignity of the individual human soul. He stops, puts down his pen, and dies. Right there, at the desk, surrounded by books and papers and unfinished thoughts, the way a philosopher should die, not peacefully in bed, but interrupted mid-argument, still trying to say one more thing about why persons matter more than systems. Berdyaev wrote over 40 books, got translated into dozens of languages, was nominated for the Nobel Prize, influenced existentialism, personalism, liberation theology, left behind a philosophical legacy that should have made him a household name. And in the West, almost nobody knows who the fuck he is. Academic philosophers study him if they're specializing in Russian religious thought or Christian existentialism. The Orthodox Church still hasn't forgiven him for the heresy of putting freedom before God. The capitalists don't like his critique of economic objectification. The socialists didn't like his critique of collective tyranny. He's too religious for the secularists, too radical for the traditionalists, too individualistic for the collectivists, too mystical for the rationalists. Nobody wants to claim him because claiming him means accepting his central insight. You're doing it to yourself. The slavery, the objectification, the reduction of your infinite, unrepeatable personhood into a predictable, manageable, optimizable thing. And nobody wants to hear that. So why does Berdyaev matter right now? Why does a Russian philosopher who died in 1948 have anything to say to you in your dopamine-harvested, productivity-optimized existence? Because he saw it coming. All of it. The reduction of humans to data, the worship of systems over persons, the voluntary surrender of freedom for the comfort of being told what to think, what to want, and what to be. The mechanization of consciousness, the industrialization of the soul. He watched it happen with communism. He watched it happen with fascism. He warned it would happen with capitalism and technology and any other system that treats persons as means instead of ends. And here we are, proving him right. Maybe we're not looking for freedom. Maybe we're terrified of it. Maybe that's why Berdyaev's philosophy disturbs us, not because it's wrong, but because it's right. Because it strips away every excuse, every rationalization, and every comfortable lie we tell ourselves about why we can't be free. You're not trapped by your job, your debt, your obligations, or your circumstances. You're trapped by your fear of what would happen if you actually chose to be free. Berdyaev spent his entire life through evolution, exile, occupation, and loneliness, choosing freedom over comfort, over safety, over belonging, over everything. That steamship leaving Russia in 1922, carrying a man who would spend 26 years in exile rather than one day in silence. That's the image. That's the choice. If Berdyaev's voice calling from 1948 sounds louder than anything you heard today, that should tell you something. If the idea that freedom precedes God makes you uncomfortable, or if you realize you've been volunteering for your own objectification every single day, then good. That discomfort is the only thing standing between you and complete mechanization. If you want to keep digging through these philosophical crime scenes with me, exploring why the best minds of the last century kept screaming warnings nobody wanted to hear, you can find the show in all the usual digital feeding troughs. We're on TikTok, Instagram, and X with the handle @TheObservingEye, and we are on YouTube at youtube.com/@TheObservingEye as well. And then there's the Substack, which is the actual home base at theobservingeye.com. Go there if you want deeper explorations and don't want to listen to any of this stuff with adverts. If something in this episode stuck in your throat like a fishbone you can't swallow, don't keep it to yourself. Join the conversation, drop me a comment, send a message, fire an email into the void at david@theobservingeye.com. I'm on the other end, sitting at a desk like Berdyaev mid-sentence waiting for the signal, but I'm not dead yet. And if you want to support the show, don't just passively consume it. Hand it to someone whose optimized, algorithm-curated life needs some disruption. Give it to the person who's one LinkedIn post away from complete spiritual death. We all have one of those. Thank you for listening. Your time and attention are the last things you own that haven't been fully monetized yet. They don't know how to put adverts in your mind just yet. I love you all and I appreciate you spending your time with me today. Take care, everybody. Much love. Stay free. And I'll catch you soon.